moment.
So exciting that I get to see Michelle like a million times this week.
We'll be starting in a moment. We have people continuing to join us. We'll wait a moment longer. Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this webinar, STEM Accessibility, Accessible Design for Complex Digital Resources, Part 1, is presented by Michele Joy Bromley. This webinar is made available by the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group. Northwest HEAT is a joint project of the Orbis Cascade Alliance and NWAC, the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium. Our mission at Northwest HEAT is to advance our common goal of ensuring that digital services, systems, and resources are equitably accessible to all users. Our overarching goal is to cultivate a community of practice among faculty and staff who support digital accessibility on their campuses. To do this, we provide a series of professional development opportunities, such as this webinar, and we share best practices and resources through a collaborative knowledge base. If you'd like more information about the work of Northwest HEAT, we invite you to visit northwestheat.org. You can also communicate with us through the poll that we will share at the end of this session. Before we introduce our presenter, we will take a moment to share some housekeeping details. This session includes a chat, which means you can submit questions to our presenter throughout this session. This session includes captioning. You will find instructions on how to access captioning in our Zoom chat. This session is being recorded, and the video will be shared on this event's page at northwestheat.org. Our presenter for STEM Accessibility is Michele Joy Bromley, a digital accessibility and inclusivity specialist. We've already learned valuable design and remediation strategies from Michele in past seminars. And now, Michele, we turn it over to you for the presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group, for having me. Y'all are in for a stuffy one because we are all here this morning for STEM accessibility basics, accessible design for complex digital resources. I am your friendly neighborhood digital accessibility and inclusivity specialist, Michele Joy Bromley, pronouns she, her, hers. I've been a digital accessibility specialist for over 15 years now and a nerd for over 37. I have a Master of Arts in English from Oregon State University, which laid the foundation for a focus on accessible, inclusive, and usable content design and remediation. I started out as a college writing instructor before moving into disability services field as adaptive technology specialist and alternative formats coordinator. I'm now a certified accessible document specialist and certified professional in web accessibility through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, with a focus on digital accessibility validation and remediation. Speaking of which, before I get started, I want to ensure that this session is as accessible as possible to all attendees. Everyone intakes and processes information differently, so visual presentations with potentially scattered narration may not be your, wait for it, cup of accessibility. Yes, yes, I did take that joke out for a spin again. And I know behind those muted microphones, I got at least two chuckles. At least two. This is why I'm making my full slide deck, including all links and references available to you in an accessible HTML format. So please do navigate to bit.ly Northwest NWHEAT 26 STEM. That's bit.ly NWHEAT 26 STEM, or use the QR code on screen. You're welcome to reference these materials during this morning's session or keep them as a takeaway reference for further study. Alrighty, the agenda. We are keeping it simple. We are keeping it tight. Is the URL case sensitive? I believe it is. That is an excellent question, Heidi. Thank you, Alice, for putting the URL in the chat. We're gonna keep this agenda tight. Design, validation, questions. That's it. We're covering STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And y'all are getting art and music notation up in here as a bonus. We are covering all of that in an hour. So today will simply be a starting point for you. Your on-ramp to the freeway, so to speak. We will luckily have a hands-on practice session in 2 weeks, during which we will have no set lecture agenda. Rather, you can bring your own document or follow along with a sample and practice applying accessible design, validation, and remediation best practices in real time. But for now, let's dig in to a cover-to-cover crash course in STEM accessibility. I will say, before jumping in, coming from a background in disability services where all of my work as an accessible media specialist was by nature reactive, I love having opportunities like this to engage proactively with faculty members, instructional designers, and research librarians who are thoughtfully designing, validating, and remediating their course and learning materials in order to ensure maximum accessibility, inclusivity, and usability. Alrighty, back to the agenda. I'll give you a spoiler alert. The design section, lots of stuff. Lists of tools you need, best practices, necessary design and validation workflows. The validation section, it's pretty short, partially because there are no quick fixes for inaccessible STEM content, but also because we're short on time. I do have some additional resources I can share from some more expansive webinars I offer specifically on digital accessibility validation, and some of those are in the references section. Design. Let's dig in. We're going to do a basic review of some foundational accessible design principles and then zoom in on complex graphics, equations and formulas, and art and music notation. But first, show of digital hands and or chat huzzahs, if you're comfortable, on a scale of I'm a digital accessibility genius to say what now? People who feel as if they have a solid handle on accessible digital design basics, like you're feeling good to go. Give me like a positive sign. Like a huzzah, like a yay, like a yeah. I'm feeling pretty good. Okay. People who feel as if they might need a little foundational review before digging into accessible equations. You give me like a, I don't know, like a sad face. Oh, like a crying face. This is great. I love Zoom. I'm getting sad faces, worried faces. This is wonderful. Okay, well, some grouchy faces. Well, either way, I feel like we really shouldn't jump into complex graphics, equations, and formulas, art, music notation without reviewing the basics. We don't have a lot of time, so I have taken an earnest pass at shrinking an entire workshop of its own into a single slide. Okay, so these are the essentials, the nuts and bolts of your most basic accessible digital design checklist. I've broken it down into 4 categories: style, structure, data, and media. So this is all of it. This this is your web content accessibility guidelines workshop in one slide. Under style, we have typography. Use legible, accessible, larger fonts. Avoid all caps outside of explained acronyms. Use of color. Never use color alone to convey meaning, and always use sufficient color contrast. Readability. Leverage empty space strategically. Use plain speak, proofread, and ensure accurate reading order. Structure. Headings. Headings. Use true semantic hierarchical heading structure. Just one heading one and go from there. Don't be tempted by that title style that you see lurking in Google Docs. It's not real. It's tempting. It's just go for the heading one. Links. Use descriptive, meaningful link text, avoiding lengthier, complex URLs. Lists. Use properly formatted built-in list structure for bulleted and numbered lists. Data. Properties. Ensure a descriptive file or page name and validate all language attributes. Oh, Jen asked a great question. No, the title style in Microsoft Office isn't good either. Sorry, I shouldn't have left Microsoft Office out. Don't use the title style. It's just, it's deceptive. Heading ones, all the way. I don't remember where I left off. Properties, I think I covered. Tables, use them for data, not layout. Include header rows and columns. Avoid merged cells. Form fields. Clearly identify and label all form fields and ensure the directions are accessible. Media. Audio and video. Captions, transcripts, and audio description. Clean and complicated. Images. Alternative text that conveys the context and intended function of the image. Congratulations. You have graduated. You are ready to take on accessible design for STEM and complex digital resources. An entire workshop in one slide. Amy asked a question, does anyone have a good way to add table headers in Google Docs? There's a little option to pin a header row on your tables in Google Docs. But there is not an option for a header row in Google Slides at this time. Alrighty. So, jumping in to STEM. Understanding accessible design for complex digital resources really begins and ends with user pathways. You're not gonna be able to really jump into the design and the validation and the maintenance without understanding how people use STEM digital resources. And while there are many categories of adaptive or assistive technology that folks with disabilities use, I typically focus on the tools that people who are blind use to engage with STEM or other complex digital resources. And this is because accessibility via screen reading software and refreshable braille display require keyboard accessibility, which is the basis in most cases for accessibility via text-to-speech technology and speech recognition software and a lot of other assistive technology. So, how do people who are blind engage with this content? Well, there's the obvious screen reader audio output. There is digital or embossed braille. And finally, embossed tactile graphics, most often generated to support map accessibility, floor plans, physics, linear algebra. Embossed resources, I'll note, are typically provided via accommodation. Proactive design calls for that keyboard accessibility I mentioned, which will allow for equitable screen reader audio output and the ability to easily translate to digital braille should a given end user require that format. Alrighty, we are officially ready for complex graphics. This is a pretty broad category that more or less includes graphs and charts, including flowcharts and organizational charts, diagrams and illustrations, where surrounding text relies on the user being able to understand the graphic, maps showing locations or other information like weather systems or districting data. I've included an original example here. How folks feel about artificial intelligence. Totally valid and very real data. Not very complex, to be sure, but sufficient to use as an example for our 3 areas of focus: description, navigation, and use of color. So let's talk about description first. Complex graphics require alternative text, just like any other image. But alt text is still meant to be a brief, simple description of the image's content and function. In the case of a graph like this one, this often takes the form of a summary of what is being measured, compared, or reported, and likewise, a description of overarching trends. With a bar graph this simple, alt text is enough to cover all relevant information. This is a bar chart comparing 3 types of feelings that folks have about artificial intelligence, with AI is ruin coming in at 19%. AI is life at 27%. And AI is a tool at 54%. For more complex graphics, alt text alone will not be enough. Complex images typically require what the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Accessibility Initiative refers to as the long description. This can take multiple forms. A linked or attached tabular representation of data, like the linked Google Sheet, y'all will find attached to this definitely very real bar graph in this HTML set of slides. A literal long description offering context in surrounding text or in a linked appendices. The location of a long description can be detailed in an alt attribute or be structurally associated with the image using HTML5. I want to note here, speaking of AI, you'll note the subtle connection here, very subtle. AI generated descriptions are not a substitute for accessible digital design. Alt text and long description must be validated to ensure that the context and function of the image are equitably accessible to someone who is experiencing the image auditorily. And that's not necessarily going to be a generative AI interpretation of what the image looks like. So after description, we've got navigation. For navigation, you have to remember that accessible design does not begin and end with screen reader accessibility alone. For people with cognitive, reading, or learning disabilities, effective use of white or empty space is critical to readability. Likewise, clear tab order and focus indicators to ensure that data points and comparison parameters are navigable via keyboard for people who are using text-to-speech software or who are unable to use a mouse. With this graph, since most presentation software does not allow for a fully accessible interactive graph, in addition to alt text, I've linked the image to the source data in a Google spreadsheet to supplement my alt text. So finally, we need to consider use of color. Recalling our basics review slide, you never use color alone to convey meaning. This is particularly important with complex graphics, where information is often, if not always, keyed by color. And it still can be. The important checkpoint here is simply to ensure that you are never using color alone to convey meaning. So use in-graphic labels whenever possible. In this, again, very legitimate graph with very real data, I've included labels both within and below the bars themselves, rather than having a totally separate legend. Similarly, if I had used a pie graph, I would have included the labels within each segment or beside and attached. If I were dealing with a more robust data sampling and in-graph labels weren't feasible, I would include a legend but rely on different textures for bar graphs and varying symbols for data points on a line graph or histogram. Okay. I know we're blazing through. Moving on to equations and formulas. It's not as simple as typing it in and handing it off. Math requires suitable design software on one end and suitable reading technology on the other. beyond an end user's baseline screen reader of choice. Because PDF files have historically posed limitations to accessible STEM content. Complex digital resources containing equations and formulas are typically accessed via screen reading software through a browser, um, using non-visual desktop access like or NVDA, plus a reader like MathCat or the Access 8 Math add-on. This can be done auditorily or via refreshable braille display. To generate equations that are accessible to screen readers like NVDA, again with a math reading add-on like MathCat, designers need expertise in LaTeX, or they need an equation editor that can generate transferable math ML. Math ML or math markup language is is again typically accessed via browser, available in Chrome, Firefox, or Edge. Um, and it can also be accessed in Microsoft Word via Office math equations. Um, this is actually one of the most effective ways to generate accessible math, to use an equation editor in Microsoft Word, even more so now in March 2026. um, you heard me say that historically, because PDF files have posed limitations for accessible STEM content, exporting math to XHTML has been one of the most effective ways to deliver math content. And it's one of the most common ways outside of LaTeX, for folks to engage with math content, is to use predominantly NVDA, but sometimes another screen reader plus a reading technology add-on like MathCat. Um, but actually, Microsoft just announced several software improvements in February, not the least of which included a little gem for all of us. Word and PowerPoint can now export accessible math to, wait for it, PDF files. Um, which will then be subsequently accessible via JAWS or NVDA using MathCat. Now, I only just read the blog myself. It's linked in my references slide. But it appears that history is in the making as we speak. And this is pretty great news, leading into the ADA Title II deadline, because it's been historically a, um, yes, Monica, that in answer to your question, Microsoft is exporting MathML now. Um, this is a pretty big deal. It's pretty big news. So, um, at least per the blogs that per the blogs that have been coming out February and March 2026. And it's a pretty big deal because, really leading into this April 2026 deadline, um, yeah, yes, 100% to Monica Olson's comment. We do need to do some testing to confirm. It is very, very, very fresh news. Ooh, Janine did some testing, with JAWS, this morning. But this is a pretty big barrier that our faculty have been facing because, it is pretty common, for STEM faculty to have substantial expertise, in LaTeX, but PDF, portable document format, is a very popular format, with higher education faculty. And historically, PDF has really not been, a format that is acceptable in terms of delivery for, um, in terms of access for screen reading software. And now it seems that it may possibly be, a format, that can possibly work. So definitely something worth exploring. Word was already a great option for generating equations, but the ability to export to, um, uh, MathML PDF, rather than XHTML only is possibly a pretty big deal. Anyway, it is important to note that when using an equation editor, you can't simply use a symbol from the special characters menu, insert super or subscripts, or copy and paste images of equations in order for users to equitably interact with the equation by character. In the case of this slide, for example, I am not asking you to engage with the quadratic formula or to give me a solution. While this presentation is about math content, y'all are not required to do any math. So instead, I'll share the alt text behind it. X, x equals a fraction. The numerator is negative b plus or minus the square root of the quantity b squared minus 4ac. The denominator is 2a. While this equation, as simple as it is, allows for alt text that is relatively accessible via screen reader audio output, more complex equations and formulas should be designed in such a way that users are able to engage with all parts of the equation individually as needed. To design accessible equations, you need expertise in LaTeX or an equation editor that can generate transferable math markup language or an accessible image with accurate alt text. You can use the built-in equation editor in Microsoft Word, for example, with either Unicode Math and LaTeX, though at least historically, expertise in the latter is often required, and the output itself historically some required additional skill to read. But again, things are changing fast. Those without LaTeX expertise have historically been able to use a more intuitive equation editor like MathType or Equatio with minimal math or science expertise required. MathType in particular is essentially a more intuitive WYSIWYG editor. It does not require LaTeX skills, exports to MathML, and produces automatic long descriptions as needed. MathType can likewise export to Nemeth Braille and other more specialized formats. This is wading a little bit more into remediation territory than design territory, but tools like Equatio and MathPix, linked later in my slides, can support optical character recognition for not only scanned equations, but also handwritten equations. It's great stuff. An incredible design innovation for STEM instructional designers and faculty. Regardless of the way in which equations and formulas are generated, they must be validated for accuracy by a subject matter expert or by comparison to the original source materials. Alrighty, this is your bonus round. Not STEM, but still wildly complex, so it fits very neatly into that complex digital resources category. Art and music notation, all on one slide, no less. We'll cover art first. This one is tough. And the short answer here is the same as the answer that I provided for STEM-oriented complex graphics. Long description. For sure, alt text that briefly just summarizes the context and function, but then long description in surrounding text or linked in an adjacent location. For artistic long description, it's important to recognize the subjectivity and total dependence on context. A subject matter expert, like the instructor themselves, is typically the right person to provide long description. If that's unfeasible, at minimum, you should reference subject matter expertise and surrounding text to support a legitimate long description. Music. This is a tough one, and I'm more than happy to dig into more detail with folks during Q&A. When I've done this live, I've said, or better yet, over a drink. But for music to be screen reader accessible, it must be converted to an electronic music file, music XML, or music braille, BRF. The reason is that for many music students, audio files will not be enough, as it will be difficult to piece together how all of the intersecting notes and cues blend together. Accessible electronic music files can be accessed via accessible music notation editors like LimeAloud. Music Braille can be accessed via refreshable Braille display or embossed Braille. To recognize and translate music from an image file, you can use specialized optical character recognition software for music, like SharpEye, for example. A significant amount of editing can be done within this program. Any notation SharpEye cannot handle, however, must be transcribed via music notation editing software. Ultimately, similar to art, subject matter expertise is essential. And in fact, with music, outside of the distribution of audio files where sufficient, we just have to recognize that composition and music notation expertise is required. Due to the amount of editing required, even with the most sophisticated optical character recognition software, it can be more time efficient to transcribe the original image or sheet music scan from scratch using a music notation editor. Music can then be exported as a music XML file or translated into music Braille via a Braille music translator like Goodfeel. And in my experience as an alternative formats coordinator, the most effective way to create accessible music was ultimately to hire graduate students in a music composition program to do this work. Okay. So this is a quick summary of helpful design tools. Optical character recognition software, like Abby Fine Reader, for Abby Fine Reader portable document format, in general. Equatio or MathPix, for equations and formulas, SharpEye for music notation. Advanced equation editing software like MathType by Wirus, or apparently maybe now the Microsoft equation editor, if it can export to MathML. And professional music notation software like LimeAloud or Sibelius. Okay, that was a lot. I am trying to the best of my ability to ensure that we have plenty of time for questions. So I'm just going to briefly touch on validation. Okay, let's talk automated checkers first. There are many generative AI tools and AI-powered accessibility checkers on the market that purport to be the new easy button for accessible design and validation, and sometimes even remediation. And I want to make sure we take some time to clarify the good things that these tools have to offer, and likewise the dangers they pose when viewed as the solution rather than an augmentative tool. It comes down to this. Generative AI and other AI-powered accessibility tools can absolutely be useful time savers, often extremely effective in cutting down on repetitive and basic remediation work. For digital content designers who are equipped with the expertise and tools to effectively identify accessibility barriers that have gone undetected or been misidentified by the tool. Basically, are these tools an easy button? They are not. No. Are they an easier button? Yes. I've used generative AI several times now to take inaccessible digital resources like a flat portable document format file and output an attempt at accessible HTML. ultimately from onset to final product, including validation, the process takes me substantially less time, sometimes, depending on the PDF, by a couple of hours than it would have taken me had I conducted conversion and validation entirely by hand. If I take that flat scan and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna create but by hand the CSS, and the HTML. I'm going to create a beautiful web page version of this thing from start to finish by hand. It would take me hours. I use generative AI and I can cut that down and have it and do it so fast. But the big however here is that the only way I was able to come out of that process was something functionally accessible and legally compliant was because I took the time to validate the output and to engage back and forth with the generative AI tool I used to call out the things that were missed and to likewise ask the tool to undo some of the things that it got wrong. It's also important to recognize when the right time is to take the digital resource out of the AI tool entirely and manually fix issues using the partially correct version as a starting point. Even more salient, I am not well versed in LaTeX or in MathML. So if I were validating STEM or any other complex digital content, I would not be able to depend on generative AI or any AI powered tool for validation. I would need to use a more intuitive equation editor that doesn't require LaTeX expertise and then validate against the source content, ideally using NVDA with a math plugin. And truly, regardless of whether or not the content I'm validating contains complex graphics or equations, for an AI-powered accessibility checker to be effective and useful, even with more standard digital content designers need to ensure that they are first well-versed in manual accessibility validation. When digital content designers don't bring that expertise and understanding to the table, automated tools run the risk of being misunderstood as fix-all solutions that may ultimately generate more barriers than they remove for assistive technology users by bringing a false sense of security to the content designers who use them as that sort of green check button. So let's talk homework. I mean, extremely engaging professional development reading. Um, your most definitive and most jargon-heavy checklist will, of course, come directly from the source. The World Wide Web Consortium maintains a How to Meet WCAG quick reference that covers every web content accessibility guideline and associated success criteria. A couple of dependable and slightly less jargon-heavy checklists come from a few of the more established, reputed digital accessibility consultancies. The Web Accessibility Checklist from DQ Systems, the must-have WCAG checklist from Level Access, and of course, the customizable WCAG 2 checklist from Web Accessibility in Mind, or WebAIM. A less comprehensive but much easier to digest checklist is WebAIM's quick reference on web accessibility principles. And of course, there's always that slide earlier in my presentation. What was it? The giant workshop in one slide. If you're hoping to start with something even easier. So screen readers as a validation tool. I won't dig too deeply into screen readers as validation tools since we've got limited time. And screen readers as a validation tool is also kind of its own workshop. What I will say is that testing via screen reading software can genuinely help you to knock out quite a few checkpoints all at once in your manual validation process. Testing with a screen reader can help you cover landmarks and heading structure, keyboard functionality and traps, tab focusability, order and indicators, form labels, direction and validation, alternative and link text quality, meaning conveyed with color alone, Now, if testing with a screen reading software sounds intimidating, it can be, but it can also make your validation process that much quicker and more efficient as you learn to use it. So a summary of some solid validation tools for complex graphics, equations, and formulas, specifically color contrast checkers. So there's the Site Improve color contrast checker, the Web Accessibility in Mind color contrast checker, equation editors. There's or equation editing software. There's Quatio by TextHelp, MathType by Wirus, screen readers or screen reading software. There's non-visual desktop access or NVDA by NV Access, or JAWS, specifically alongside the MathCat or Access 8 Math add-on. Um, and we've probably got about 10 minutes for questions. Ooh, okay. I've got a question from Carrie or Kari. Want to make sure I'm pronouncing that
Carrie.
correct. Carrie, hello, Carrie. Are there recommended screen readers that are easy for a newbie to learn to use? I find faculty have to bail because they can't fully set up and use screen readers, especially if plugins or add-ons are required for math. I typically recommend NVDA. Mostly because JAWS is prohibitively expensive. VoiceOver has a pretty high learning curve. Though if you're already a like diehard Mac OS user, then VoiceOver is going to really kind of need to be your go-to. The struggle with STEM content is that you're really gonna need to use a Windows screen reading software to test with. So again, with JAWS being pretty prohibitively expensive, NVDA is going to be my recommendation. And really, generally across the board, NVDA I find to be the quickest in terms of learning curve. Web Accessibility in Mind has a really fantastic, um, what is their article? It's testing with NVDA or validating with NVDA. They have a really good getting started with NVDA article. And the most important thing when setting up NVDA is to immediately go to the settings and lower the words per minute speed and change the voice to something that is digestible. Because the thing that tends to overwhelm people immediately is that the default words per minute are often set for a typical native screen reader user. And for a sighted person who's never used assistive technology, that's going to be way too fast. Also, for some reason, the default voice for NVDA is often really weird. Um, it's uh it's just very robotic. Also, NVDA has a whisper voice that is very disconcerting. Um, so, so setting those settings at the beginning can help. Also, letting folks know that the control button is an immediate shut up button. That can kind of help people. But the problem is just telling people to use screen reading software and go for it. They'll get overwhelmed immediately and stop. Um, Using screen reading software for validation should always come with some immediate starting guidance. There are workshops and trainings that I offer on that, with some immediate getting started guidance. It can really be incredibly helpful and incredibly useful. But just kind of throwing someone in the deep end, it can feel a little overwhelming. Monica.
Uh, Thanks, Michelle. I just want to briefly go back to what we think we're learning about Microsoft's updates to their math equation editor. And because there were
Sure.
some questions and comments in the chat that I'm wondering if this update is true and accurate, may need, we may need to address. So what I think I heard you say, Michelle, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, and I haven't looked at the blog link yet, is that Microsoft has made some software updates that will, um, when you're creating math using their built-in equation editor, it's going to export as MathML when saved as in PDF. Is that what you were saying earlier?
Um,
Or no?
so let's see. And keep in mind, as I shared,
This is brand new.
it's brand new. I just read it. I just wanted to make sure to give y'all a heads up because I don't want to give y'all outdated information and say that like this is not a thing you can do. Um, let's see. They
And the
just
reason
in
why I'm asking
oh,
is because I was looking at some
yeah.
conversations in the chat about, you know, okay, when we're using in Word, is it better to use Unicode or LaTeX?
Mhm.
Uh, do we have to stay in the Word format, when saving and giving to students or not? And I just thought, oh, I wonder if the answer to these questions might be changing in real time based on what we think Microsoft is releasing as product updates. So that's the connection I'm trying to bridge right now.
Yeah. Here, let me pull up. This is one of the articles that I popped in my references.
Michelle, I
Um,
also put one in chat. This one's Microsoft Insider, so it's from someone on the Microsoft team, and I just pasted the verbiage related to this topic.
oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I believe that's the blog article that's in the references slide. And then I also shared an article from the PDF Association, that gives a little bit more context from the PDF side, sort of the workflow for accessible STEM content, um, from like uh LaTeX to PDF, versus Word or PowerPoint to PDF. So again,
Okay.
I'm still reading about it myself, so this is all, as I shared, definitely something worth exploring and something that should be tested. So I can't really give too much information on it. But definitely something worth exploring.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. What I'm hearing is
Yeah.
potentially, yes, MathML is going to be exported, but let's test and validate.
Yep,
That's what I'm hearing.
absolutely.
I have one more comment, but I see Eric has his hand raised, so I'm gonna lower my hand.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm just gonna put in one plug on my end for the Northwest Heat. You may have seen a poll question that just came out a couple of minutes ago. If you can take a minute or a few seconds to answer that, just to get some feedback on this webinar as well as maybe future topics that you might be interested in. If you could just take a few seconds to fill that out before you exit the webinar, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. And you should be able to access it via your polls tool in case you close the window. And I think there was another question or someone's hand was raised.
Yeah, Eric.
Going back to music, um, so what
Yeah.
I have recommended my faculty do is if they're posting like a sheet music PDF, just making sure there's a statement that if you need an alternative format to reach out, because we were getting derailed with web accessibility rules upcoming and the discussion of how to do that. And there's no WCAG standard for music. And then the other part that was coming up was fundamental alteration, where if we're providing an XML file, that's pretty straightforward to convert to a MIDI file. And I get what is our requirement under the upcoming rules with music, I guess is what I'm getting. Like there's no WCAG standard. So should it be coming through the DS office if we're talking just Canvas, not like public web pages?
Yeah. Oh, for music. Yeah, I think and Eric, that's a fantastic question. And it's probably something that I should have noted on the slide when I talk about accessible music. Um, for music to be fully accessible, I think it's something that I should have drawn the comparison to tactile graphics. That it's more along the lines of tactile graphics that that music is complicated um in that a musical score is not going to be fully accessible to a person who is blind simply as an audio file. Um, However, to my knowledge, and this is when I add that asterisk, obligatory asterisk of not a lawyer, that seems to pop out in Q&A at some point, at every presentation. Um, but to my knowledge, that hasn't come up as a requirement associated with web content accessibility guidelines, as a level A or level double A, proactive criteria. But it would, I imagine, come up as an accommodation requirement. So similar to tactile graphic. Um, so it's, you know, it for music to be accessible. Um, so I think and Station made a comment. WCAG covers digital content, so uh it would apply to digital information, and that's kind of tricky because we're talking about uh digital files, and so we're getting a lot of questions from folks about audio files, about the music files that are available on folks' websites. And folks are saying, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of like, is it accessible because it's audio? Does that mean that it's accessible to people who are blind? And if they're not a music student, yes. But I would draw the parallel as a digital accessibility SME. I would draw the parallel between music notation and tactile graphics. Um, so, so I hope that answers your question. It would not, so I would draw that parallel for as an accommodation. I did know an earlier question, Julia mentioned a number of music accessibility software is noted, but only a few highlighted on the design slide. I do apologize for that. Um, uh, the notation softwares, Finale, um, used to be one of the most common notation softwares, and it was sunsetted. So the two most common now, Sibelius and Muse Score. Sibelius, Muse Score, and Lime Aloud. Whoa, all of a sudden the chat window maximized. Um, Sibelius, Muse Score, Lime Aloud are music notation software, Lime Aloud being the most accessible for screen reader users to use. And then Good Feel is a music braille editor. Um, okay. Uh, did someone else have a question?
Michelle, I was just going to mention it's or sorry, not 7:59, wherever you're at, but we're almost to the end
Yeah.
of the webinar. So I didn't know if you wanted to share your reminder about the next webinar and the
Oh,
prepared
yeah, absolutely.
before we
That's
close
it.
out.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who attended the document accessibility series, this will be a familiar format to y'all. We did this is a kind of a presentation lecture format on STEM accessibility, and then 2 weeks from today, we've got a hands-on session where we're not going to have kind of a planned lecture agenda, but more we're going to pull things up on the screen and take a look at it. We're going to talk about different strategies for how to tackle long description for complex graphics. And we're going to take a look at, and maybe we'll even take the Microsoft equation editor for a spin, do some testing live. With the previous webinars, I told folks just bring samples on to the hands-on practice. Because this is STEM, I'm going to ask that if you've got some nasty complex graphics or equations that you want to bring, I would like you to send those in advance, because it's STEM, and I don't know that I want to be scared spitless live. So if y'all could email, my email's on screen, michellejbromley@gmail.com. So I'm gonna ask that y'all send anything that you'd like me to look at like a week in advance, please. Or at minimum 3 days in advance. And then oh, we're 1 minute over. I sincerely apologize. My contact information is on screen. And you're welcome to reach out with samples for the next session, and also just to reach out with any other inquiries about workshops and presentations and all that jazz.